Hey, it's Luke from LT Gaming, and today we're taking a look at SpaceCraft, the new space sim from Shiro Games. The studio behind games like Northgard and War Tales, and also Dune Spice War is a favourite of mine. This is what I've been following very closely, because when a proven strategy developer decides to jump into the space sim genre, my interest level immediately goes from mildly curious to right, clear my evening, I need to see what this is. This is our Should You Buy series, where we play the game, give you our honest first impressions, and try to help you work out whether it's worth your money, your time, and in this case, whether it's worth strapping yourself into a starter ship, mining half a planet, and slowly building your way toward galactic industry. And before we jump in, if you enjoy space games, give the video a like. It genuinely helps us here at LT Gaming, and it keeps us traveling across the cosmos. So SpaceCraft is an online space exploration, crafting, building, and automation game, where you start out with a very humble ship and gradually work your way up to much bigger things. The basic idea is actually really compelling here. You mine resources, craft components, build and customize ships, set up planetary bases, automate production chains, and eventually start linking everything together with interplanetary logistics. It's not just trying to be a game where you fly around space looking cool, although you do get to do a bit of that in this one. It's much more about building an industrial footprint across a persistent shared galaxy where players can work together, form corporations, collaborate on bigger operations, and slowly carve out their own place in the universe. The actual structure is quite approachable, at least at the start. You begin in first person, walking around stations, interacting with terminals, taking in the world. And then fairly quickly, the game gets you into your own ship and starts guiding you through the core loop. The tutorial overall is slow, but I'd also say it's quite well put together. It does a decent job of introducing systems without just throwing you out into space and saying, well, you know, do your best. Ship flight can be played in third person, or you can zoom into a more cockpit style view with the middle mouse button. Though I wouldn't say that the cockpit experience is anywhere near as strong or immersive as something like Elite Dangerous, Star Citizen, or even some smaller dedicated space sims. It's functional, but it doesn't quite give me that feeling of living inside the ship. Now, it is important to say that SpaceCraft is launching into early access, so there is an expectation that systems will develop, improve, and expand over time. But early access, oh, not this again. I mean, every time early access, it's getting quite frustrating, and I will say Tabletop Tavern didn't do that, and I also hear Carthage Bell and Pew Nickham's not going to do that, so praise to them. It's just such a tricky thing to judge, because while you're buying into potential, you guys as a consumer are still buying a product today. And that means we need to look at both what the game could become and what it actually offers right now and judge it at this point in time. Now, the strongest thing SpaceCraft has going for it is the sense of ambition. There is a real big space game energy here, and you feel that almost immediately when you leave the station for the first time. Launching out into space, moving between stations, heading down to planets, and seeing that seamless transition from orbit to surface is genuinely impressive. The game looks particularly strong in stations where the lighting, presentation, and first-person scale do a lot of work. But even planet-side, there are moments when you get that proper sci-fi exploration feeling. It's not always jaw-dropping, but when the game is working, it absolutely has atmosphere. I also think Shiro deserve credit for how much they have managed to build in what feels like a comparatively short development window, especially when you compare it to some of the giant space sim projects that have been in development for a very, very long time. Yeah, I'm looking squarely at you, Star Citizen. SpaceCraft is also launching with a large shared universe, a focus on multiple sectors, loads of systems and planets, and a gameplay loop that already combines mining, refining, crafting, building, automation, trade, and cooperation. That's a lot of stuff. It's not a small pitch, it's actually kind of mad, to be honest. And while I do have concerns about the current state of the game, I don't want to underplay the fact that there is a proper foundation here. The on-foot sections are also surprisingly good. In fact, they might be one of the areas where SpaceCraft actually does things better than the bigger space games. Moving around stations feels clean and immersive, and the UI and presentation are generally strong. The onboarding is structured, and the game does a decent job of making you feel like a part of a larger sci-fi economy. The music also helps a lot. It gives the whole thing a slightly grand exploratory feeling, and while the game can feel a little slow, the presentation does give it a calm, spacefaring identity that I really wanted to fall into. And finally, the ship customization and corporate angle are genuinely strong ideas. Building out your ship with place components is fun and intuitive, and you can immediately see how players are building these weird, functional space machines that somehow get the job done. The corporation system could also be one of the game's biggest strengths, because the idea of players working together to build supply chains, support shared goals, expand across sectors, and contribute to something bigger than themselves is actually the sort of thing that can give a space sim long-term life. The ingredients are all here. I can absolutely see the version of SpaceCraft that could become a really great space sandbox. Just a quick interlude to say most of you who watch the channel are not subscribed.
So make sure to go down below and hit that subscribe button because it helps smaller channels like us grow really quickly, and both me and Tom really appreciate it.
But now it's time for the bad stuff. The biggest issue for me is that SpaceCraft does not feel like it's moved far enough from the playtest build into something that feels ready for a wider paid release. When I first played it, I was impressed because it felt polished for a playtest, but that is really a very different bar from a game launching into early access and asking people to pay for it. I also jumped back in more recently the other day, and when there were more players present in the shared universe, the performance on the planet was honestly abysmal, which you can see in the footage I captured. That was not always my experience throughout the playtest, but for a game built around a persistent online galaxy, performance under actual player load is not a small issue. The pacing is also rough, and I say that as someone who can happily spend hours in X4, No Man's Sky and Elite Dangerous, doing things most normal people would describe as unpaid labour. So when I say SpaceCraft feels slow and monotonous, I don't mean it in the usual space sims are slow kind of way. I mean the gathering, smelting, crafting and early progression can feel slower than it needs to be, especially before automation starts to open up. For example, if you miss one resource or you can't find that one thing you need on a planet, you can end up flying around in a tedious loop, scanning, searching and wondering whether the universe itself has decided to personally waste your evening. The loop has potential, but right now it often feels like you're waiting for the more interesting version of the game to arrive. The shared universe also cuts both ways. In theory, a persistent galaxy full of other players is exactly what a game like this needs. However, in practice, in my experience, it can also mean abandoned bases scattered across starting planets, more technical issues when players are nearby, and of course the greatest danger in any online game, having to deal with other people. Hahaha, joking aside of course, I love other people, this is why I run a YouTube channel, I don't talk to anybody, just a microphone. I do think this could be one of the game's biggest strengths later, but right now it also adds a layer of messiness to a game that already feels like it needs more time to settle. Just give me a free evening, X4, the Star Wars Interworlds mods, and I'm a happy space simmer. And then finally there's the flight model, which for me is one of the biggest disappointments. It just feels strange, more like flying a drone than flying a spacecraft. In space you often feel like you're locked onto a plane, even though 6 degrees of freedom movement does technically exist, and the ship never feels like a home or a machine with weight, presence and identity. To me that really matters, because one of the core fantasies of a space sim is not just travelling through the universe, it's living in your ship. Add in planets that can look really nice but feel lifeless compared to something like No Man's Sky, and SpaceCraft currently feels lighter than it should next to the established space sims. So should you buy SpaceCraft at launch? Honestly, LT gamers, this genuinely pains me a bit to say. I think for most players this is a wait for now. I really wanted to love this. I wanted to get behind the idea of Shiro Games stepping into the space sim genre and adding something fresh to a category that is thin, deeply loved and always crying out for more good games. But based on my time with it, I don't think SpaceCraft is releasing in the state it should be. The structure is here, the ambition is here, and the presentation is strong. There's absolutely flashes of the game it could become, but it really feels like it needed another year of development before being put in front of the general public as a paid early access release. Now there is an important caveat here. The price point is fairly reasonable at $26.99 launch or your regional equivalent, and that does change the conversation slightly if you like to test games like this. It's not launching at $49.99 and asking you to trust the process. But weirdly, I almost wish it had waited, launched later at that higher price, and arrived as a more complete, confident version of itself. Because there is the foundation of a great space game here, and Shiro has a track record of delivering excellent games. But right now, unless you're a huge space sim fan who specifically wants to support the project early and doesn't mind technical issues, slow pacing, and systems that still need a lot more depth, I'd say wait. SpaceCraft is certainly not a never buy, it's a not yet. And I'm disappointed because I wanted to be more positive, but I also think that's the honest verdict. So there we go, I've been Luke from LT Gaming. Make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you out there amongst the stars.